Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another fabulous Utility Broadband Alliance webinar. I'm Bobby Harris, the Executive Director of UBBA, in case you don't recognize my voice. I am very honored today, though, to have three of our top members on this webinar sharing their knowledge with you. We are just a few days from the UBBA Summit and PlugFest, which is sold out. So if you're not there, this is a great opportunity to learn. If you are going to be there, please make sure you meet with these companies in person in Charlotte. But I don't want to take up too much time, except to say, for those of you who are on the webinar, if you have questions, we're going to try to save some time at the end. If you have questions, please use that question toolbox there in your toolbox and type in your questions exactly the way you want them read, because that's how we'll read them. If we don't get to all the questions at the end, we'll follow up with you offline, but we want this to be interactive, and you've got three of the best minds here, so make sure you pick their brains on this great topic. So again, you didn't come on to hear me talk. We've got attendees loaded in now. Jonathan Singer from OneLayer, I'm going to turn it to you, sir, to set up and make introductions and take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bobby. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jonathan Singer, and I'm the Product Marketing Director at OneLayer. OneLayer, our mission is to help transform enterprise cellular environments from operational silos into integrated enterprise networks. And we're going to explain what that means throughout the day, but in a less salesy way than I just gave it to you. But I'd really like to start by introducing or giving my fellow panelists here a chance to introduce themselves. So Spencer, why don't you say hi to everyone, and then Bruce will go to you, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and happy to be here today, Bobby. I'm Spencer Burks. I'm the Private LTE Program Director for LCRA.
Thanks, Spencer. And I'm Bruce Albright. I'm with Burns & McDonnell. Been there about 5 years. Prior to that, I was with Southern Link. So been on a sole mission the last 5 years to take private LTE as a technology in the utility space. So I'm happy to be here today and enjoyed talking with Spencer, Jonathan, and hope you guys get something out of our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, so let's set the stage a little bit. We're here today to talk about navigating multi-network operations in utilities. And I think we need to start with like kind of what that means, right? So we're going to take it from the top, and we're going to talk a little bit about, let's kind of frame this for everyone. So, Spencer, let's start with you, and Bruce, will go to you afterwards. Just in one sentence, what's changed the most about utility connectivity in the last 3 to 5 years within sort of the realm of our topic here?
Yeah, so for LCRA, one of the biggest things that has been going on has been regulatory changes that impact our existing OpenSky 900 MHz LMR system. This is a system we use for mission critical voice. It's our Black Start network. It's something that has to work when nothing else does. It's also our network that we use for a lot of our OT environments. So we bring back SCADA information that's related to floods and flood early warning systems, and really what we use to do hydrological modeling for our entire basin. So we have this mission critical network impacted by a move to broadband, and it's really driving us to deploy LTE here today.
Great. Bruce, how about your perspective?
So I would look at, in the I guess the last 5 years, I talked about taking LTE as a carrier technology, moving in the utility space. I think in the past, SCADA and telemetry were were asynchronous. You could afford to wait minutes for data. Now today's grids are demanding, real-time data and broadband communications, AMI 2.0, DERS, dynamic load control, all of these things that are pushing our power grids to be more of a read-write type access instead of read-only. So you got two-way flows now, and having that direct power control for not only power flow, but restoration processes. Always on is kind of part of grid resiliency itself, right? If you lose data flows, you really can't restore your power grid properly. You can't even see what's going on. So utilities are now behaving more like private carriers in their own right, with more deterministic latency and coverage and designing their communications network. It kind of reminds me of back when things shifted from a copper basis to a fiber basis. Utilities are now doing that same thing at a wireless layer. And that's kind of the biggest shift I'm seeing right now.
Great, yeah, and we're similarly seeing that at one layer, and of course we come at it from a security perspective. So when we look at how what's changing about utility connectivity is that it's really integrating more deeper into OT systems, right? Like at the highest level. And from our perspective, that also means that, as systems that weren't previously connected or were air gapped are connected to things that are connected to the cloud, connected to the public internet, we're obviously seeing a lot of that new threats that are evolving and coming in through that sort of that way of looking at the network. So I think, we look at it very much from a security perspective, and we'll get to touch more on that as we go forward. So let's dive a little bit in some more into this. Spencer, let's talk a little bit more about what's happening at LCRA and how kind of your priorities are changing as you look at private networking.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jonathan. So I touched on a couple of the kind of the base things that we have in place today, and that's on our LMR network, which we've had since the 90s. And as I mentioned, that's mission critical voice, and it's a shared network too. So it's not just for LCRA. We also operate that network on behalf of other utilities, other distribution utilities, cooperatives, municipalities, transit authorities, public safety entities. So there's a lot of entities on our network. And now we're talking about an expanded data capability. So before we could do 9600 baud, now we can do 10 megabit pretty easily. And it's really just expanded our use cases. The other thing that's really nice about it too is we moved to a standard 3GPP technology, this technology platform that the carriers have really developed over the years. There's a lot more features, there's a lot more data that's available, and there's just really a lot more you can do. And so then from LCRA's perspective, it's all, once again, about mission critical communications. So how do we make sure we have secure, reliable information? From a reliability perspective, that means backup power at all of our sites. That means we have redundancy built in. That means we harden everything. It means we own private transport, so we're not dependent upon anything that could be an ISP connection or be in the public cloud or anything that could just go down. So we make this huge investment on something that is extremely reliable. And then once we have reliability down, then we move to resiliency. So private infrastructure, things that are air gapped from the public, things that are air gapped from the internet. We deploy advanced cybersecurity tools. I know we're here to talk some about that today. We have some from Ericsson, some from OneLayer, and then it's everywhere we are. So we are a rural river authority, and we have just a sprawling footprint in a lot of places where you do not have public carrier coverage. And especially as you try to reach down into deep ravines and valleys and look at river flows and river stage and all that kind of stuff too, you really have to build out your own wireless connectivity if you want to see that data. So that's really where we are with LTE, is making sure that we build something that's reliable, resilient, and really built for us, right?
Okay. And from a practical perspective, what does that mean as far as like building your own, partnering with public, how are you looking at using, working across different, modalities and network contracts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And some of that is legacy for us. Like we have had AVPNs with AT&T. We maintain those today. There are things that we've secured over, using IPsec, using built-in tunnels. We're able to do routing across them, layer 3. And so we're able to use that for certain information, but it's really not a mission critical connection for us. Like I said before, if you really need it to work when nothing else does, then we can't call that mission critical. It's really kind of your best effort type public carrier situation. So we have some of those, but we're migrating them over to private wireless. Now, what becomes interesting, and I know LCRA has been evaluating this, and a lot of other utilities have been evaluating this, but what is a role for a public carrier for somebody who's deploying a private network, right? Once you get this up and running, is there value? And there's really two areas that we've seen. One is you want to extend your coverage, and that can be just moving beyond your traditional footprint, or it could be maybe augmenting your RAN build out until your RAN's actually up and running. And then the other big benefit is to do failover. So should something happen to your network and your network's down, it's someone else's RAN that you could potentially fall over to. The big thing for LCRA, from our view, is really extending coverage, especially you go into our mission critical voice. So if we want to operate all throughout the state, everywhere we are, if we want to expand our coverage, then suddenly that becomes a very attractive option. And more so than actually doing the RAN failover. If I look at most of the reasons I expect to have an outage on my RAN, I would also expect a public carrier to be impacted as well. These are big events, your floods, your hurricanes, your tornadoes, something like that. So it's really this extend coverage that we've been looking at. And then from there, there's two options. One, we can stick with our AVPN today. And that's where we have a donor SIM card, essentially, which we're able to put into a device. One of the big things that we're looking at doing from our view as we continue to have dual SIM capability between private LTE and a public carrier is making sure that we put both on the same SIM card. So really working to make that work. The main reason that we want to do that is just so we can control our SIM. If we want to get our device to fill back to our network, that allows us to do it on the SIM card level instead of having to program every single device. There's multiple options to do it, but if I think in terms of, okay, well, how do we scale devices? I want to make sure it's as easy and automated as possible. And so I think single SIM does that. The other way you can really implement roaming is doing your S5, S8 interface. And so connecting your core through an IPX to someone else's core public carrier side, and then actually roaming onto their network that way. So there's a bunch of trade-offs. I don't know if we want to get into that right now, Jonathan, but I'm happy to talk to that as well.
I think we'll get into it in a little bit, but one thing that I do want to kind of give a little bit more context on, and then I've got a question for Bruce. Spencer, how long has LCRA been working on private network planning from an LTE and 5G perspective? Just so that you give, because you seem pretty advanced and there might be folks in the audience that are not quite there. And so I want to give them a yardstick here.
Okay, yeah, great question, Jonathan. So we first started working on private LTE in 2018, and this was related to the NPRM related to the BIN 106 with Terex BDV Wireless at the time. And so that's really what started the discussion internally at LCRA. We've had a lot of conversations internally with our stakeholders, with our executives over the years. But as far as our actual deployment itself, that really began in earnest in the summer of 23, so a little over 2 years ago. And that really kicked off our deployment, starting with RFPs, getting our network up and running, get that deployed. And where we're at today, we're finalizing our failover testing on our core network. We're targeting January for production traffic. And we have 26 sites up and online today.
Cool. All right. So obviously, for those of you listening, Spencer's team has been working on this for a long time, and they've very much gone down this private route. But Bruce, as you know, there are going to be utilities out there who either can't build their own private immediately or don't have plans to, based on the way that they're organized and the decisions their executives have made. So before we go deeper in general, can you give an explainer of other ways if you want to go entirely private or entirely with a public carrier? What is this public APN or public carrier private APN, and what's happening there from a security perspective and an operations perspective?
Yeah, sure. So we talk to a lot of utilities, and there are utilities that are wanting to go LTE. There's obviously the ones we work with like LCRA, TECO, and Ameren, Evergy, others that have made that choice and are moving forward. There's others, as you mentioned, that are I don't know that they'll ever afford spectrum that's their own, that can build a fully private network. So there's got to be some way to help them as well. And Spencer mentioned some of the needs. I think I look at all of the disaster recovery efforts that I've been through in the past, and went through a lot with company before Southern, with Southern. We went through hurricanes, disaster recovery. Owning and operating your network is the only way you really control the outcomes. You can actually go out and repair those things. But thinking of when I hear someone say, well, I'm secure because I have a private APN with carrier X, I start thinking about, well, what really is an APN? And the APN is, in my mind, it gives you kind of segregation, not isolation. So it kind of segregates your traffic. It gives you some QoS that they have assigned to that APN. So it tells priority, it tells routing, it tells those kind of things for your device. So it does segregate your traffic somewhat, but it is not isolated. It is not more protected than anyone else's data. It's still using the same networks that everyone else is using. And I think that's kind of a misconception, that when I get a private APN, well, I have a private connection direct to, whoever, direct to their core. And I've got this network that's now secure that I can go ahead and now I can trust this somehow better than if you're just getting data. So yeah, private connection may be better than getting your data across the internet. Still, internet with VPN, kind of the same. And when it comes down to it, it's not a whole lot different. So when you think that hey, I have this from an APN perspective, that's really not the solution you're looking for. I can go into all the stuff that OneLayer is doing. I'm a big fan of OneLayer. I've known Dave a long time now. The things that he is doing in the market, looking at the different point and attack vectors for networks, whether they're public or private, and how do you secure those networks, and how you give some kind of control back to your device fleets, whether you own the RAN or you don't own the RAN. And just looking at all those things to me are critically important for utility and utility applications. I'm a firm believer you really need to own it if you're going to control your redundancy, your resiliency, how your recovery of the network during disasters, because they're going to happen. All of those things, you need to own your network. But if you can't afford it, there's other factors. You can find partners like Southern Link or LCRA who are reaching out to the different co-ops and munis in their area saying, hey, we have this mission critical network built, and we would love to help serve your markets with mission critical services just as well. I think those kind of things are what we're going to see in the future. Don't want to discount the public carriers, but public carriers, in my mind, are there to give me my cell phone service, let me watch cat videos, or whatever that comes up. When it comes to critical needs, critical infrastructure, and to me, utilities are right there at the top. When you have power outage, your world is kind of in chaos. It almost goes the same now with internet outage. Nothing in your house is going to work without the internet, which I found out when a landscaper dug through my fiber the other day. But when the power is out, nothing can return to normal till the power is back on. Those crews can't go out there and safely work. They can't get the power restored. And now you can't even have visibility into what's out and what's not out unless you have really solid communications that you own and control the utility. So yeah, I know I've wandered. I told you I would likely wander, but these to me are really important, and understanding, what is that APN that you're getting, and what you do get and don't get. What kind of, are they going to allow your QoS to be a high priority? What type of end-to-end encryption, identity management, network ownership, all of that. It's not just APN routing. That doesn't really give you a whole lot. So I'll take a breath.
No, and I think those are all great points, and certainly we're seeing very similar things in the market. I mean, if we want to talk at sort of the highest level, from a utility standpoint, we're seeing a lot of pain in the market around both security and operations, right? And we've been seeing deployments that get delayed by years because the network teams hadn't brought security into the process early and had to work backwards to, fix their networks, and, securely onboarding devices at scale has been, another problem that we're seeing. And when we look at, when you're talking specifically around public APN, that, again, OneLayer really comes at it from the angle of devices. And so all the feedback we're going to give is from like, hey, what do devices mean for your network? You can't run a network without devices on it. So if you're running all on public carrier, then you have to consider, well, how many carriers are you working with? If you're working with one, like, okay, but then you really have some problems around, failover and power outages. And if you work with more, now you've got multiple platforms to log in. You've got devices with different SIMs. It's your visibility into your devices, which was not great to begin with, becomes even more fragmented. Root cause analysis becomes painful. There's a cascading series of pains, which isn't to say that you can't or shouldn't do it. Certainly, there's a reason why we're looking at that market. It's because people have made very conscious and intelligent decisions to say we're gonna do a majority public carrier solution, and we're going to figure out how to go forward with it. And And they are doing it successfully, and they're just running into kind of like a different set of challenges and pains than folks who go all private do. And we're sure that there's going to be, we're going to land somewhere in the middle, right? With folks using, as to go back to what Spencer said earlier, using some of the public stuff and maybe, and hopefully building more and more private. But, Spencer, I'll turn it back to you. And that's, if these folks can't go fully private on day one, and you just described it a little bit, can you talk about like what a phase migration that works and where you would start as a utility if you say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me, I've got to go private?
Yeah, great question, Jonathan. Yeah, the first question that it really starts with is you just really need to understand, your internal use cases, your internal, and really what options are available to you from a spectrum and a technology perspective. That was a great place. Birds of Mac actually helped us out tremendously on our initial assessments, really understanding that. But once you understand what spectrum you want to move forward with from a private wireless perspective, or which ones you are likely to do, tying it back to your question on devices, understanding that can help you make sure you have devices on the field that can support both, and so you're able to migrate in the future. I thought you had a great point, Jonathan, talking about devices, because as a utility, you're not just managing a network, you manage the end-to-end use case all the way to the device, and including the things behind it. So when you're doing these deployments, you're doing these migrations, you have to have that holistic mindset. And yeah, if you're deploying devices out into the field, you may want to do both public carrier and private wireless. And so you can set those up so that you can be prepared when you need to go migrate thousands and thousands of devices, that they're ready to go and you can do it at scale. And there's a lot of nuance around that, Jonathan, we can talk to. I don't know if you want us to do that right now, but happy to.
Well, I think I wouldn't mind diving into devices for a second here, because I think it's a key part of this this transition and the migration strategy. And you've obviously been doing a bunch of this, but like, what do you wish you had in place, 12, 18 months ago around devices and SIM strategy, and how did that strategy factor into where you got to, and what do you wish you maybe have done differently?
Yeah, well, device has been a big focus of ours, and especially we're deploying Band 106 with Anterix. It's an ecosystem that's being developed, and there's an increasing number of devices available. And so we've had a lot of great partnerships, and we've been working with vendors very closely to select devices and make them available for our use cases, and working on a frequency band. Anterix has done a lot of work too, just to get Band 106 officially certified and get more chipsets available for it, getting the capabilities into devices, kind of working that side as well. But then also for us, mission critical radios. We need push-to-talk radios, working with L3Harris on those, and just really kind of developing this device ecosystem to start deploying those devices today. And yeah, in a perfect world, we would have devices sooner rather than later, so that we could actually start deploying devices with SIMs in them. And so then as we build out our RAN coverage, as we get our core up and running, we're able to just start pulling devices across.
Yeah. And there's a topic that when we talk about migration, and it's kind of like the end goal. Actually, maybe we should talk about the RAN first. Like, was there anything in there specifically about like RAN build sequencing and that you wanted to talk about, like why you would start with fixed devices and when you would migrate to mobile, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we have a 5+ year RAN build out. So just 5 years to cover our existing open sky network, just replacing our footprint. And then we have some additional expansion that we're going to do after that. But just for the initial migration, obviously you don't do it all at once. And so it's something that you're training up staff, you're getting your machine up and running. Like once you have your design, you get your supply chain support, everything has to be in line for you to start this production system essentially on building out your RAN sites. And so once you start building, you have to really understand, okay, well, where do I want to start and what makes sense? And the big thing with your customer migration is you just have to think of, okay, well, what footprint do I need to migrate certain customers over? And so if you're doing fixed point, if that's your primary use case, then it's really easy, right? I get a site up, anything that's fixed, it's not moving, if it can connect to that site, I can migrate that over now. And so that's where some of those use cases come up first. If you have mobility use cases like we do, going back to mission critical push to talk, and also we're going to have some additional mobile connectivity into vehicles and remote access down substation right-of-ways, things like that. You really have to have your entire network up first before you can migrate everything over fully. Right. So that's just something you have to keep in mind. For LCRA, we do have different customers, and different customers have different geographic footprints too. So we are able to target certain regions within our network one at a time to be able to start key customer bases migration over. But all those factor into how you want to deploy your RAN, and it all ties into your migration timeline.
So I would jump in there a bit, because this is getting into one of the things that I see at the utility side that has concerned me, as we have helped utilities move down this path of private LTE. There seems to be this, let's build phase one, let's get some coverage so we can start deploying use cases. It's a big challenge to plan specific deployment of use cases when you don't have full coverage of your footprint. You have to know specifically what use cases fit into the coverage you've built. As Spencer was alluding to, if you're building mission critical push to talk, that gives you the basis to build it all. You have to build it all before you can really go there. That opens up, the Pandora's box of all of the different data devices that you need across your footprint to go out and deploy whatever you need. Then you can look at filling coverage gaps and filling holes, or just adding capacity. And I think that was really the catalyst that made Southern Link successful. Their first out of the gate, use case was mission critical push to talk. Had to replace the aging iDEN network. We built coverage to cover not only the footprint, but all dirt within the footprint. So they built a layer of coverage that now opened it up to any use case that could be deployed for data devices. The private network was available. A lot of the other utilities I'm seeing now, they build phase one, they're like, well, this is really hard. I'm still having to use public cellular because some of the coverage is in there, and they're in this mixed area. And they don't consider that, hey, phase two, you need to start, planning the next layer of coverage. I will use a name of one of our utilities, which is TECO. They've kind of started down the road, and they've gotten to a point where they're not really even deploying yet, but they're already planning the next phase of mission critical push to talk to replace their LMR, because they see the value of building that full layer of coverage across their footprint. And it's the only way to really unlock the use cases. We do a lot of work with TCOs and studying all the different benefits you're going to get from your LTE network. The problem is you don't get those benefits until you have full coverage. So a lot of utilities start looking, well, wait a minute, I'm not getting the benefits I thought I was going to get out of LTE. Why am I even doing this? And they start pausing, they remove funding, and they slow things down instead of pouring in and speeding things up and getting that layer of coverage that they need to really open up that full development and be able to get the full funding. And they've already done the most expensive things, the core, the RAN, the core, the spectrum, all of those are purchased. I see that as a problem with the entire utility industry, is understanding that deployment strategy, having that fully built out so you know exactly what you have to build to deploy each use case, and then designing your coverage to make sure you have the coverage in place that you can fully deploy that use case without reliance on filling in with public cellular. So just some things to think about, I think, as you go through designing and deploying these networks. It's fairly important.
Yeah, I think that's a really important set of points. We certainly talk about it when we talk about security, which is like plan for security at the beginning, involve your security architects early, because otherwise you're going to miss things and you're going to have to go back and do the work over, right? But Spencer, you've gone through this process, and this is a little off not our script, but our list of questions. But like, how important is dream big? Early on, because that's what this is. I don't know if dream big is, maybe it's a little bit of a flippant way of saying plan for all the use cases you're eventually going to want. But what did that planning process look like for you? And how basically, where do you see the truth in what Bruce just said?
Yeah, Jonathan, great question. So, going back to where do you start, and then really understanding your utility, what do you do, what do you need, what are your communications needs, what do you have in place today, what's working well, what isn't, and then understand the technology that's available to you too, right? So what technology capabilities do I now have that I did not have 5, 10, 20 years ago? And as the technology evolves, some of these opportunities evolve as well. The other big thing on the cybersecurity side, the attack surface of the utility from a cybersecurity perspective is going up, not down. And the number of attack vectors that people have to attack utilities is also going up, not down. So we do see this as just everything's evolving forward, right? More devices, more security, more resiliency, right? The impact of outages is, from a power perspective, a power outage is just going up and up and up. And so things you can do to restore more quickly, things you can do to avoid outages, all that, there's a lot of value to it. So really you're just reviewing this and understanding, okay, well, how can I, like, what is the best solution? What's the optimal approach that I can take for these things? And for each utility, it's gonna be slightly different. I mean, El-Cerrito is a river authority, so we have water on top of all the electric power transmission generation. We also have third party and public safety and public service. And so there's a lot that goes into it. And so from our view, it was, can we provide a mission critical platform, and what does that mean, and what does that look like, and is there value to it? And that's really what led us down this path to really build up what we built today. And yeah, tying it all back into talking about engaging cyber early, I mean, that's a huge partner for us. We're building a mission critical, secure, resilient network. So you have to design it from a cyber perspective from the ground up. And that may be one of the things that people don't realize on the private network side that you get to do that's very different than if you're piggybacking on public carriers, is there's a lot of extra ways you can go about designing your network, building your network, a lot of advanced tools, advanced access to information, the ability to close down certain things like the Salt Typhoon, where public carriers were hacked so people could pull locations of devices. People could, I have a lot of people talk about, is my data encrypted or not? Well, what about the location of device? Also, what about denial of service? We had another issue pop up recently in DC, where they have all these cell modems. They're going to do a denial of service attack on the UN. Secret Service busted it up. So there's a lot of different attack vectors and different ways to think through the protection. And as you're going through a private network deployment, you can now do a lot more. And it's just a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, if there's anyone it depends in the audience of like where you are in your stages of planning, but I think it's pretty fair to say at this point that, 5G, we've crossed the chasm in regards to network purchase, right? So, in the past, it was kind of like part of the innovation budget. And now, as you see, like we've got full networking teams that are working on this. It's becoming one of the keys to utilities hitting our modernization goals. So we've gone past the questions of like, is this network going to work? And we know now, like, the question is different. It's, what do I need to make it work for my environment? And that means you can feel really safe in putting together a real long-term plan that says, these are all the things that we need to do. And so let's get everyone necessary involved to make sure this is architected correctly from the get-go, because re-architecting a cellular network is no fun, right? All right.
Well, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, well, I mean, I'll leave that one out there, Bruce. So, Lexi, did we miss any key points in here before we want to kind of move to the next set of questions here? We didn't really talk about, we touched like briefly on spectrum. So Bruce, I want to give you a chance here to talk a little bit, speaking of planning and planning how you're going to architect your network, but obviously spectrum plays a big role in here, and there are different types of spectrum that are out there for different uses. And how should buyers really think about the choices that they're going to make when they're planning, and when they, let's connect that to devices and chipsets and what they need to look for and what they should avoid?
So yeah, spectrum, I mean, now you're talking about something that's a very, very deep and broad subject. But as it relates, I mean, it probably is the most critical question you're going to answer as how you're going to design and build your network is, what spectrum am I going to use? And I think it becomes really, really important to understand all the different aspects of spectrum, whether it be, what of these spectrums are actually 3GPP certified? What is the band class they're being put into in 3GPP, 4G, 5G capabilities? But you also have to get into what are the ecosystem, what is driving this ecosystem? Is there a big enough push behind, band 8106 with Anterix? Is there a big enough push there that chipset manufacturers are going to pay attention and add that spectrum to their chipsets? Then not only is it going to be in the chipsets, because 3GPP said, hey, we're approving this band, we're putting it in, the chipset manufacturers have to see a market that they believe is big enough to go make the chips. Then the device manufacturers have to say, I'm willing to design my device around the use of this chip. So there's this multi-layer approach when it comes to spectrum and understanding, the difference between band 26, band 106, and all of the different spectrums that are out there and available now to utilities is of critical importance. A lot may look at CBRS, well, that's free. Well, I mean, you can go down the list of what are the problems with CBRS. But there's problems with band 8106. There's problems in band 26. You need to really understand what are my most important issues. How much spectrum do I need? And I hear all the time that, well, 3x3, that's just not big enough. And it's like, big enough for what? It's not a capacity question at all. 3x3 has nothing to do with capacity. It has to do with data speeds. So it's the speed. Your spectrum is really from your tower to your device. How much data can you push across a 3x3 is really what you're talking about. And that data speed is what's important. When you get up to band 26, it's 7x7, so you can really use a 5x5. Gives you higher data speed. The capacity is actually achieved by how many cell sites do I need to achieve this capacity. So when you start running low on capacity, you have a 3x3, you're adding cell sites, you're doing cell splitting, you're doing all these things to design your network. But because you own and control it, you have that capability. So it's really kind of a deep discussion on spectrum availability, what's affordable, what can you put, but it really comes down to what use cases am I trying to solve for? What am I going to use this network for? What data speeds do I need? What are we looking at in the future? How many people are coming on board with me? How am I going to drive this ecosystem? And all of those questions get rolled into the question, and utilities, ask one thing, and that is, well, how much is it? And that's just, it's a bad place to start. Is how much is it? And it's down to dollars per megahertz pop, so it's different cost in different markets. We all understand that, but at the same time, it's really, what do you need it for? You may not need a full 5x5. 3x3 may be good for the use cases you're considering, or you may need the full 7x7 where it gives you a 5x5 plus this 1.4 IoT channel that you've envisioned. So really understanding what you're doing, what you're buying, why you're doing it becomes really critical. And I'm going to stop because I'll keep going on this question. And I am not a spectrum salesman, so I just evaluate it.
All right. So I'm going to turn a question over to Spencer, and it's based on what you were just talking about. So obviously there's a ton to consider around spectrum and devices and what does what, and everything that Bruce said. I usually, and to the audience out there, when we're in person, I can see you and I can see your faces and decide whether or not you're following along. And especially when we get into some deep technical issues, I don't have that visibility into you. So I want to assume that there were some people that weren't sure where to start with all of the advice that Bruce just gave. And so Spencer, what sort of expertise do you need to have on your team? Because you built this team out to make sure that you're able to answer the questions that Bruce just posed to the folks in the audience and said, you need to understand this. What do you need on your team to be able to do that?
I mean, if you're just talking about evaluating spectrum, there's regulatory concerns, there's just kind of understanding what's going on in the market. You're working with attorneys internal, you're working with your consultants. For us, we worked with Bruce. I recommend starting there. But talk to folks who have done spectrum purchases and evaluated things, and talk to your utility peers, see what's there as well. And it's interesting. I mean, the main things for LCRA is, when we looked at it, is we said, hey, what's available, right? And then we said, okay, well, where's our device ecosystem? And that pretty easily narrowed it down to what we ended up going forward with, which was Anterix for band 106. There's some other cost implications too, just how much does spectrum cost, but also if you have what is the propagation characteristics of that frequency, right? So if you're higher band, maybe you can get higher data rates, but the site doesn't broadcast nearly as far, so you have to have a way higher site density, and that can make it cost prohibitive. So there are a lot of trade-offs, and as you kind of focus in on what you want to do, you have to understand that piece. And one thing Bruce talked about is, from a capacity perspective, for your use cases, does LCRA have any concerns over a 3x3? The answer is no. 3x3 has been plenty of capacity for everything we wanted to do.
And you know, when it comes to timing purchases, and this is really kind of more of what you were just saying, which is just like, hey, what's available, and then going with devices from there. But is there anything else you want to talk about, like how device purchases, spectrum, and ecosystem maturity do or don't line up properly, and like how to handle those situations?
Well, yeah, that's a really important thing too. And so you're in a mission critical space, which means a couple different things. What do you need, a smartphone or do you need a data modem, right? Do you need an MCPTT device? Is that what you're after? And really tying back to the use cases, what devices are there, and then reaching out to those vendors and understanding what it is they do produce for you or not produce. One of the things going forward with us on Band 106 is there's other utilities deploying on it too. So we have similar use cases to them. So together we make a larger device market, so to speak, for a device provider. And then from there, it's working with those vendors. Yeah, to a certain extent, you can't have infinite devices because we just don't have the, tens of millions of device purchases that maybe you do if you're an AT&T and you're reselling phones. So it's one of those things where you're, at the end of the day, you're going to be standardizing on a few different devices. You have to have more than just you in that marketplace. There have to be other people that have similar use cases as you that drive that. And you have to think about that when you're making your spectrum purchase.
I think on the device side, we do a lot of work with a lot of utilities on what devices are available or coming available, but looking at not only 3GPP's roadmap, but looking at what are the vendors' published, pipeline. All the vendors are going to have a pipeline showing what they're planning to do, and then working with those vendors and the different OEMs to make sure that they're going to provide you the capacities that you need, the types of services, all the way down to multi-band support in their device plans. Spencer mentioned having, dual SIM. We also have to have our dual MZ on your SIM cards, where you can go public and private. You also have to have the device that will actually do those kind of things. So having, working with your device OEMs, understanding what's out there, what's in the market, and then helping drive the market. And to me, UBBA is a great place to have this collaborative effort where everyone can get together and you can come at the market from a stronger position where everyone's bringing devices. But if you look at it together, there's a lot of devices out there in the utility space, and it can demand a lot more attention together than it can individual. So.
Yeah, that's great. And we're talking a lot about devices here. And we've talked about planning for purchase, but what about planning for scale? So, let's say you've made some correct selections or some good selections on your devices. You think you know what use cases you're going to do, and now you want to move from, say, hundreds to thousands to more, right? Which is, Spencer, what your team is doing. What are the processes you need to change to scale? And how do you think about onboarding those devices? So, procurement, provisioning, inventory, automation. What does this look like? What do you need to plan for?
Yeah, that's a really great question there too. And for us internally, going back to our radio network that we have, it's 10,000 devices that we're looking to migrate as part of our base deployment. And those 10,000 devices were added on the network over a decade and a half. So something we built out over a long time. And now we're going to a place where we're trying to scale into the 100,000s pretty quickly. And so it's just an entirely different world. And to your point, yeah, how do you scale that? Right? We're not going to necessarily scale, I can tell you for sure, we're not going to go scale our staff up just to match that exactly. And so you have to think, okay, well, how can we automate this? And at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. So you're tracking your own devices once again, right? Because you own your devices, you own your use cases. So you want to have some visibility in an asset management database. You're deploying it on your network too, so you have to provision it not just on your kind of in-application network, you have to provision on your LTE network. You do that using your SIMs. So there's multiple steps, multiple processes, and from our view, we're looking to automate it from the front end. So how do I automate all my key ingestion? How do I automate assigning out all the, for different customers who have different APNs on our network? How do you assign to the right APN? A lot of these are static IPs, so how do I do static IP assignment? And then I want to do that at scale. And so we can just go roll chipsets, whether those are, or roll SIM cards. So we're either giving blocks of SIM cards to customers who are doing the on-site deployments, or we're sending those to a manufacturer so they can preload them into things such as smart meters. And then once all the provision on the front is done, just to get the SIM in place, the first time they attach our network, we want to go capture all the information on that device. So we want to know what type of device is it, where is it connected, what's its, all the information around the SIM card, what SIM is in it, the IMEI on the device, all that kind of stuff too. And we use that to automatically build out our database. And so our asset management database is now just looking up all these values and telling you what this actually is. And then the other big thing that we have, I mean, that's just your initial asset management onboarding. Because we have third-party traffic, we want to build third-party customers. So now I can see here's how many devices they have on, and here's all the different use cases that they're doing. And then finally, because it's private network, we're deploying mission critical communications, we implement a quality service. And I don't think we talked about this initially, Jonathan, but as a utility, I want low latency. I want things like my relaying and my SCADA and my voice to be a higher priority on the network and actually preempt lower levels of traffic. And so a big thing for us just going to operate this network is how do I make sure a device is going to have the right QoS assigned to it, right? I don't want something that's supposed to be super low latency recloser doing system protection on my distribution grid to be hijacked by a corporate network when someone stands up a bunch of data flows that they're doing on the IT side, right? It just doesn't really match. So you want to be able to automate this once again at scale and say, okay, well, if this is just a mission critical network, if it's just a metering network, is this a meter that's connected? And is that meter actually behaving like a meter? And just being able to automate all that process so everything's working right, that's a really big, important use case for us as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of and there are a lot of things that are very different about cellular networks when you're looking at it from an enterprise perspective versus the perspective of an IT organization, right? Of a mobile network operator, right? They think in terms of like, I've got a SIM card, I'm going to give it to you, I'm going to provision the SIM, and I'm going to charge you for it. And their infrastructure is really, really excellent at doing that because that's the business model that it's built for, right? So, from OneLayer's perspective, we partner with the folks who make this infrastructure. It's no shade to them. We love them, but when you go and look at a device onboarding flow from an enterprise perspective, it needs to be more than just provision, activate, and then deactivate. Right? There's a whole middle ground where it's like, what are you doing while you're provisioning it? What is the data that you're taking? How does you maintain that data persistently to monitor for things like, hey, did a contractor take a SIM card out of that thing over there and plug it into their laptop so they could get better connectivity? What does that look like, right? And that gets into the security discussion. But that sort of monitoring, when you think about, hey, I'm scaling, it means that you need more than just provision, activate, deactivate. There's monitoring in the center to maintain the state and maintain the fidelity of your fleet of devices that we think is really, really important. And obviously, when you're looking at scale, you're thinking about doing a lot of this all at once. So, what does good bulk onboarding look like? And where did you, Spencer, implement automations to kind of avoid bottlenecks around staffing and the like?
Yeah, there's really two main places there. Is kind of talking down that. That's exactly right, Jonathan, and really working with OneLayer to help with this. But it's the initial SIM provisioning side, right? So how do I ingest keys from my SIM vendor? How do I bulk provision SIMs to work on the appropriate network? And how do I activate those in bulk on my network? And then the second side is getting into the security and operations side, like we talked about. I want to make sure this is a secure device. I want the right device on the right network. I don't want anyone having access to someone's network they're not supposed to be. And so then once again, using that same tool to be able to monitor everything to say, hey, this is the right device. This is connected to the right thing. And even doing other security features like you mentioned before, SIM swapping. We want to turn that off, right? So this is a SIM. This is for a smart meter. It's locked to a smart meter. And if you try to go plug that into your laptop, it's not going to work. And so just making sure we had those controls in place and make sure everything works the way we intended to make sure the network's not being abused and everyone stays secure.
I would add something to that because and when we first started all this, everything I was hearing it was on customer experience, right? What is the customer experience? Well, they're talking about a person with a cell phone, drop calls, those kind of things. They had no idea how to even look at fixed devices. And I ended up hiring a data scientist and a coder, and we're trying to build all this stuff. And that was one of the first things when I met Dave. he was showing me all these great security aspects. And I'm like, man, with the device visibility that you have, you've basically designed a system that would do great in the device visibility platform and devices. You can now read what they're doing, who they're attached to, all of these things. And Dave went off with his brilliant people at OneLayer and just started building these tool sets. And I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And it's really something that was totally missing in the utility space, because utilities they don't care about drop calls. What they care about, security of the end device, what is it attached to, where the data flows, who's it talking to, how can I get it off the system if a pole gets knocked down and somebody says, well, this is a cool device, I think I'll take it home. How do they geo-fence it? How do they put all these things in place? And again, I don't want to be salesy for OneLayer, but man, you guys have put together some really, really cool tools that the utility industry needed and nobody else had or developed, because everybody that dealt with LTE and 5G were only looking at the mobility aspects and cell phones and consumers. But taking it to that next level and understanding that device, how is the device behaving? Is the device active? Is it not active? What is it set up for? Does it have the right services? All of those things, being able to see that on one pane of glass, whether it's public or private, and some of the things that has been put together is pretty impressive. So,
Yeah, and I'm sure Dave will appreciate you hearing that, or hearing you say that, right? Because he and the other founders, they certainly recognize that like cellular and enterprise networks individually, like they're very complex domains, and then you put them together, and the ability for a utility to provide this enterprise experience while handling cellular technology, it's not easy, right? And so when we look at it again from this device perspective, we're saying, all right, just identifying the device in the first place in a cellular environment is incredibly complicated, right? We know that SIM cards, we talked about it, they can be swapped, right? IMEIs can be spoofed. They're therefore kind of weak identifiers in our point of view, right? At least within an enterprise context. Again, for a telco to like bill a subscriber, this is great, right? But they lack sort of the depth and flexibility that anyone on this call listening is going to really need to control their network properly, right? If a SIM swapped, how do you know? All you're going to know in standard network is the connection status, right? An IP address. Your IMEI, it's limited to the modem. So even if you say, oh, we know the IMEI of this device, what if your device has multiple modems or one IMEI corresponds to different SKUs? You can end up with a bunch of different problems there. So we're continuing to work really hard to solve that problem. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on everything that OneLayer does exactly, but we sort of appreciate the positive feedback on how we're doing with this, because we really think that all of this device identity is core to being able to really segment your network on a per device basis. It's core to all of the really standard enterprise security frameworks that you really want to meet as a team. So let's kind of transition a little bit into cybersecurity, and we'll take a big step back again. And Spencer, from your perspective at LCRA, what's making you and what's making utilities out there such an attractive target, and what's really changing about the threat landscape that you need to plan for today?
So if you're a utility, you operate critical infrastructure, and all of us do. We all operate things that are vital to the daily lives of everybody, whether that's providing power, providing water, just whatever the use case, natural gas for some folks too. But these are things that have direct impacts on people and the economy and our industrial production. And so they just become targets from bad actors, whether those are nation states or just kind of other rogue parties that maybe have financial motives or other ideological motives. But we know it happens, and we know it's been increasing. And we've seen that geopolitically, like the geopolitical conflict has been increasing over the last decade, not going down, right? And as we have this, like I said before, increasing attack surface, we become more and more digital, as we become more and more connected, as we have more monitoring, as we have larger footprints, as we become more dependent upon the power grid just to do everything in our daily lives, it's going to become an increasingly targeted environment. And then on the other side too, the way people are able to attack things. I mean, we have the AI just revolution right now that's happening, where they're looking to build agents and find different ways to attack surfaces. So it's something that we're seeing increasing risk for and increasing impact of that. And part of that is, how do we keep data secure? The other part is, because this is critical infrastructure, how do we keep it online? How do we make sure that someone can't knock us off so we can continue to operate as normal?
Yeah, and this was the impetus, or was security one of the major impetuses for you to change to private and to go down that route?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for all the reasons you talked about on the advanced technology that this gives us, and to be able to operate securely and like really securing all the way out to the device, just going all the way to that end. It's a huge part of it.
Right. Yeah, and I recognize that we're running low on time. So Bruce, when we were talking last week, sort of in preparation for this, you said something about, like, hey, assume they're already in. So talk a little bit about, cybersecurity readiness from your perspective, and then we'll see if we can fit in one last question from folks.
So yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about some of the guys at Burns and Mac, or 1898 and Co. that used to work in the DoD, and he'll make you crawl under a table into a little fetal position and not want to come out because of everything that's going on out there that we just really take for granted and don't know about. But utilities, their IT departments, their security has to know about everything. They have to be aware. You also have to assume that you're not going to get infiltrated, that they're already in your networks. You have to come at this from a point of, they're already in here. What am I going to do about it when they decide to start making changes or to impact your network? And it's really not just a communication grid, it's the power grid. What are you going to do when things start happening? Well, when those things start happening, you need your communications infrastructure secure so you can see it, so you can react to it, and you can make the changes to isolate whatever you need to isolate. And that's part of the control aspects of your power grid. But I would say if you think you're going to keep nefarious actors out, you're already starting from a poor position. You need to assume they're already penetrated into my network. What am I going to do when they decide to make changes or do something about it? And that's again, where OneLayer's looking at things differently. The way the architecture of the security layer, it's entirely different. It's looking at data flows and what's trying to talk where and securing it from that aspect. It's not just looking for intruders and intrusions. It's assuming that something's already taking control and what's it trying to do and stopping that. And that's what's really important right now with how we are trying to secure our networks.
I think that's fair, and I think to kind of wrap this up, that's why we are always talking about bringing cybersecurity in on day one, right? And if you're on the network side, they are your partner. Don't just consider them the Department of No, right? Bring them in and give them an opportunity to say yes, and show them that there are tools out there that will help you. I think that the kind of assume they're already in can sound like it's spreading fear, but I think it's instead just kind of giving you not a fearful mindset, but a mindset of readiness, which I think is the most important thing. Is all right, so what are your plans and how are you locking things down? Sorry, Bruce, did you want to get a last word on that, or Spencer?
No, I totally agree. Just being prepared, I think, is the answer. It's not preparing for something, it's being prepared for whatever comes. And how do you react to it? How do you recover, whether it's disaster recovery or things that happen, or cyber? How are you going to recover, and how do you control that recovery? I think is really where you have to get to as a utility operator.
I think that's fair. Spencer, do you see it in terms of like, well, these sort of threat actors, it's very similar to disaster recovery. Like, hurricane's going to happen, what are we going to do? Or an earthquake's going to happen, what are we going to do? Is that how you view it over at LCRA?
I mean, it's just, there's three pillars for us on building our mission critical network. First one is about reliability, which is making sure it works when nothing else does. It's about resiliency. It's the big second one. That's about security, keeping it air gapped, keeping it secure and online. And then finally, we say built for Texas, but that just means we have coverage everywhere we need it to be. And those are the three big things you get from deploying private wireless. And from what we've seen, it's the best way to do it.
Fantastic. Well, I think that is a perfect note to wrap up on. And I want to thank you both, Spencer and Bruce, for all of your time today. Bobby, I'll turn it back over to you to say goodbye, but thank you from OneLayer for spending time with us today. And we really appreciate everything, all the questions that we got. So thanks so much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
and,
thank you. And
again,
you guys can
we can answer questions
follow up
as
on-
needed. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Bruce. Yeah, we'll definitely let you guys follow up with the attendees and see each other next week in Charlotte. But thank you all for your insights as always. Hope you have a great and safe rest of your day, and be safe this weekend with all those trick-or-treaters out there. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.